Okay, so sorry everybody that I'm late, but I got dropped by the driver in a book fair and there were no books there, which I guess is perfectly apt for this for this morning. Hopefully by the end of this presentation, which will be relatively short, you'll not think it's too dull, too slow and too precious. But what I want to do is to basically share my experience with you. Now, I know there are lots of natural scientists in the room or people with an interest in natural science, but I'm a social scientist. And if you don't know the social sciences, it's very different in many respects to the natural sciences. Forgive me, I've just literally arrived. Now, for those of you who don't know me, you can see my title there, but I'm Professor of Sport Business Strategy and Marketing at Coventry University in the UK. And I'm also the director for the Centre for the International Business of Sport, which is a research centre that we run. So a lot of the work that I do, in fact, all of the work that I do is around the business and management of sport. So it's very different to physics and chemistry and all these other things, if that's what you're into. Now, in the spirit of things, if you want to tweet, by all means tweet. And what my colleagues don't like is students on mobile phones. If I've got students in my classes who aren't on mobile phones, I want to know why. Because if they're not tweeting what I'm saying, or else they're not looking on Google to find out more about what I'm talking about, then for me that's an issue. So I actively encourage people in my presentations to use their phones. Now, I thought we'd start off just by talking through the sporting year and looking at some of the key events that, certainly from my point of view, I might be interested in as a researcher in my particular field. So I'm going to talk through each of them. So to begin, okay, so this one's Michael, and this is and this one, and this is Qatar, and this is, and it's gone. Now, for those of you who are thinking, who is this guy? Yeah, that's his presentation. Well, I'm trying to prove a point there. Certainly in sport, it's gone like that. And I think one of the problems that I have with journal publishing is certainly when it comes to sport and sporting stories, you need to capture them now. Because if you go through the normal process of setting up a project, submitting a paper, going through a review, making some amendments, making some more reviews, making some more amendments, etc., 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 nobody's really interested in what's happened. Now, my confession is, and I'll kind of say a little bit more, my confession is that I'm kind of in a loveless marriage. And my loveless marriage started in 2004 when I became the journal editor for the International Journal of Sport Marketing and Sponsorship. And I have to confess that by 2009, I found it incredibly dull. I was just bored. I was bored rigid. I hated looking at papers. I hated having to read the reviews. The papers were just so slow. They were so turgid. They really didn't, for me, they didn't touch me in any way. And so I resigned as editor. Now, at that point, I kind of had a year on a beach, kind of drinking cocktails and doing whatever. But then in 2010, I was seduced again into another loveless marriage by Emerald Publishing. And who are the Emerald Publishing people in the room? Where? Okay, so I was seduced again by Emerald Publishing into actually setting up a journal this time. And so I'm currently the editor of Sport Business and Management, an international journal. But the problem is I'm kind of, I guess again, I find it just incredibly dull and incredibly slow. Just to give you an illustration, to go back to what I was talking about earlier, I'm going to publish a paper in the next volume of my journal, volume 5, which is about the 2010 Asian Games in Singapore. And quite frankly, nobody's going to be interested. But by the time we've been through the review process and made the amendments, and some of you might say, well, hey, Simon, you should have pushed this through much faster. Well, I am kind of fair and liberal and laid back, and I do try to give people a chance. And if a paper comes back and it requires some work, I do try to give authors the opportunity to work on their papers. But I think what I would say is my experience of the journal again, and my experience of academic publishing generally, and dare I hesitate to say this, my view of social science, if there are any social scientists in the room, is, that's what my Loveless Marriage looks like, is groups of academics wearing comfortable shoes and comfortable trousers, all sat looking at each other. And this is you know what it's like when you prepare a presentation, you go on Google Images, and I just thought this sums up academia to me. They've even got a flip chart. They've got 2 flip charts. Now, in this Loveless Marriage, where I work with such people, my head has been turned, and I've been seduced by far sexier things that have come along. And it's really leading me, or have led me, to question and to look at how I work in different ways. Now, I've been thinking about how to package this because several weeks ago I sat on an editorial board panel at a conference, and there were lots of journal editors there. And we talked about what it means to edit a journal, and I said I find it incredibly dull. And people were really quite affronted by this. They didn't like it. So what I'm doing is I'm questioning the publishing, not the science. So for the scientists in the room who think I'm questioning the science, I'm not. I'm questioning the publishing. But for those of you who want to fight outside afterwards, I will question the science as well. Okay? Because I think for those of you in the room who are probably as old as I am, when you were younger, if you wanted to buy a book, you went to a bookstore. If you wanted to buy a music, you went to a record store and you bought a black plastic thing that you put on a turntable and you put a needle on it. But as we know, in other industrial sectors, we've seen disruptive innovation. And we can think about iPhones, iPads, Amazon, you name it. There are a whole number of industrial sectors where we've seen disruptive innovation. And I think now what social media is doing, and other forms of media, is to present the opportunity for there to be some disruptive innovation in academic publishing. Now, I'm not just talking about tweeting what's appearing in your journal. I'm actually talking about something fundamentally different, something that fundamentally challenges the way that academics publish and share their work. We're nearly finished. I'm not going for too much longer. Now, it's coincidentally, for those of you who don't know disruptive innovation, I hesitate to say this, but I will. There is a journal literature on disruptive innovation that you might want to look at. But if you don't want to do that, there's a very famous Harvard Business School professor called Clay Christensen, and he really is the kind of founding father of the literature on disruptive innovation. He's got a very interesting website, Clay Christensen, if you want to know more. Now, by coincidence, one of the blogs that I really like, which is one possible form of I would call it mild disruptive innovation, is the Harvard Business Review blog. And this particular blog entry is about the X Games and the Olympic Games, and how the X Games potentially is a disruptive innovation for the Olympics. Now, you don't need to concern yourself necessarily with the content, unless, of course, you're interested in winter sports. But I think the Harvard Business Review blog, for me, is one way that academic publishing could go, because it's highly credible, it's rigorous, it's written by very clever people, and the Harvard Business Review standards as regards who actually writes for and is accepted for the blog maintains the kind of academic integrity that we would normally associate with a journal. So there's one alternative. The alternative is we've heard, is Twitter. Now, for those of you who are interested in sport, or more precisely the business and management of sport, is follow me on Twitter. Because I don't tweet about what I've eaten for lunch. I don't tweet about getting lost in the as yet unopened Frankfurt book fair. What I do is I've tried to create a proposition which I've positioned at a particular place in the market, where all I do is tweet about the business and management of sport, and I don't stray from that. And I think this is not just about promoting my research, it's also about commenting on what's happening. So all of those photographs that you saw at the beginning, Luis Suarez, for example, biting one of his opponents, there are all kinds of issues there. And so I see this as an opportunity to capture the moments as they go by, very often, if you look at my Twitter timeline, very often by referring to academic research, often not my own. Another one that a site that I like, and I don't know if people know this particular site, is The Conversation. For those of you who don't know The Conversation, I would thoroughly recommend that you look at it. So The Conversation was initially an Australian website. It's now a British website too. I write a column for The Conversation on the business and management of sport called Centre Circle. But essentially what The Conversation is a website run by journalists for academics that is then delivered to the public. So in other words, it's about academics writing about, commenting upon the latest news stories. Now, often this can be based on people's research, but equally, it can be based purely on academics giving their views on a particular thing happening at a particular point in time. Now, I like The Conversation a lot because when you submit an article to The Conversation and when you become, in my particular case, a columnist, you get access to all the metrics. Now, this is a little bit out of date. I put the presentation together 3 or 4 weeks ago. So far, last count yesterday, nearly 73,000 people had read articles that I've written. So I think I've written 33 articles for The Conversation, and 73,000 people have read those articles. Now, as somebody who's been writing journal articles now for probably 20 years, I don't think 72,000 people in 20 years have read my journal articles. I find that hard to believe. And so I think this is a very interesting and accessible way of promoting your research, sharing your opinions, showing thought leadership, provoking debate, providing insights. And I think this is really interesting because it's freely available to the general public. Now, as you may know, and I'm almost finished, I've actually told my publisher I'm not going to publish their journal anymore. And what I did was to start something called the scorecard. If you want to look, thescorecard.org. And when Emerald saw this, they emailed me and said, "Can we come down and talk to you? We need to talk to you." Why? Well, what's this scorecard thing? And they came down and I talked to them and I said, "Look, I'm not going to edit your journal anymore. I'm going to focus on building the scorecard." And so now I'm in conversation with Emerald about how can they embrace the scorecard and how can I continue working for them. Essentially, if you've not got access to the web in front of you, the scorecard is I get academics to write about sport. And sometimes these are really heavyweight articles. So if you look at if you're on the web now and you look at the scorecard, thescorecard.org, you'll see there are two top stories there on prediction. So an econometrician is predicting the scores for UEFA European Championship games this week. So there's some intellectual and methodological rigor there at times. But in other cases, if you look at the stories, it's just basically academics writing about sport in a very kind of natural, hobby-like way. And again, I think this is a very good way for academics to get their work out into the public domain. This was started 3 months ago. We've had 10,000 unique visitors so far. So people are looking, they are reading. Okay, so if you forgive the sweat and the bluster, hope that wasn't too dull, too slow, or too precious. And if anybody wants to talk more about what I've said, then I'm around afterwards. Thank you.